and I'm delighted to be joined by Woking Assistant Manager Ian Dyer for this evening's show. Ian, how are you keeping?
I'm good, thanks, Charlotte. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. I am really excited to host. This is my first Coach's Corner, and I think it's going to become very clear to you over the next half an hour or so that I am not a qualified coach by any means. However, I think over the seasons working with different managers, what's become really, really clear is not only do you have to have a really good technical and tactical approach to the game, but the psychological elements of being a football coach are really important. Is that something that you have noticed in your coaching career, an emphasis upon the psychological side of the game?
I think it's something that's become more prevalent probably in the last 5 to 10 years. I think probably twofold. The modern day player and probably some of the differences between players today as opposed to players probably 10, 15, 20 years ago. And hence the way you've probably got to act with them. I think the other thing that's changed is obviously the coach education side of things in terms of the way the courses have been delivered now by the FA and other bodies. And there's much more of probably an emphasis on that psychological side of things, and people are probably studying it in more depth than they've ever had to before. So, typically going back, you'd kind of, like you said, you'd touch on the technical and the tactical side of it. And if you had knowledge in those areas, you could probably perceive yourself as a good coach. But I think in the modern game, I think the psychological aspect of it is massively important, probably as important in a lot of areas. So as coaches now, if you kind of want to coach, I think, you maybe don't have to use all the methodology that's out there, but I certainly think you've got to be aware of it, and you may have to kind of add some of that element to your own coaching and management style.
Yeah, because the reason why I asked that is that the theme of Coach's Corner tonight is around how a coach can be effective on a match day. And it's a topic that really fascinates me because throughout my career, obviously, I've been able to kind of travel with teams both home and away and see different managers' approaches and their coaching staff around how you do prepare for a match day. Because ultimately, all of the training and everything, all the work and graft you put on in the week is fundamentally, it comes to Saturday at 3 p.m. or Tuesday at 7:45. That's the most important part of the week. So I think it's going to be really fascinating for people tuning in, whether they manage sort of an under-16s youth team or are looking to emerge and build their career within the non-league game. I think we're going to probably unearth some really interesting tips and delve into your experience around that. And the first thing I really wanted to ask is, how do you use the pre-game and half-time team talks to solidify your messages?
I think, again, this has probably changed with the modern kind of era of football. We talked about preparation, obviously, on last week's show and how kind of in depth you have to go with that in this day and age, especially at the kind of the top level and senior level. In terms of kind of your work on the opposition and making sure your players are kind of tactically ready, physically ready, obviously with your training sessions and ready in those respects. And we touched on the psychological side. I'd probably argue that pre-game, pre-match kind of team talks now are probably 90% kind of psychological. Because your work is done in a lot of respects. Take our club for an example. We obviously train using a part-time model, but on a Thursday evening, we kind of show our players a 10-minute presentation about the opposition and about the way we're going to set up to win the game on the Saturday. Part of the reasons I specifically changed to that is because I felt that I was loading the players with too much information on a game day. And that was kind of one of the things I think that a lot of coaches fall into that trap. You want to impart all of your kind of knowledge and ideas off your players, and you sometimes fall in the trap of doing it all. I'd now say probably our pre-match team talks, naming the team and giving a little bit of detail about the game is 90% psychological. It's probably 5 to 7 minutes long. And there may be probably 10% of little reminders about tactically things that you've spoken about in the week, just to
has gone into the game, and then the first half might not have gone according to plan. So when those halftime team talks come in, is that when potentially it does get a little bit more tactical because you have to use that time to get a response and a reaction from your players? Is there a sort of difference in tone sometimes between that pre and halftime chat?
I think so. Yeah, I think as with all of this, I think every manager will be different. Every coach will be different with the way they approach. I think one of the things I've learned, again, is to try and keep it as clear and concise as you can, and to really make it kind of simple for the players to take on the messages. I think the days of kind of one person talking for 15 minutes straight have gone. There's managers that I know that do it in lots of different ways. For example, in our change room, there's 3 of us that normally have a little bit of input. So obviously Douse, the manager, myself and Martin Tyler as well, all kind of have a couple of minutes to address the players and pick up specific things that we've seen. I've known managers that kind of leave the first 5 minutes and the players are kind of in there on their own, and the management staff go into a separate area and talk amongst themselves to maybe just make sure that they're on the same page in terms of the messages they're delivering as well. So again, I think probably less is more is the approach in this day and age, and again, you don't want to overload the players. I guess at half time is different because you've actually seen 45 minutes of the game, so you're in a better position to kind of strategically work out a little bit of how you're going to go and approach the second half, and maybe what things you need to do and changes you need to make going forward. But yeah, again, my advice, especially kind of with youth coaches or maybe newer coaches, would be to kind of keep it clear, maybe keep it to three key points and messages that the players can take on board, and then go and hopefully deliver in the second half.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice, to keep it concise and 3 sort of pointers, particularly at half time. I'm sure lots of people, again, across all levels of the game will find that helpful advice. And another part of the game that I personally find fascinating is the exchanges that go on the sidelines and the arguments to be had about how much a coach can do to influence a game. And I would argue I've probably seen instances where coaches have had a real impact. They've been animated for the 90 minutes, but I've also, on the other flip side, seen the negative impacts it can have on players. Where do you sit on this side of the argument around how you can influence from the sidelines?
I think you've got to be quite careful in terms of your influence once a game's kicked off. Is quite limited in terms of kind of the effect you have on the game. You obviously can't go and physically kick every ball and make every decision for the players. So I think obviously, the emphasis on your coaching and your organisation in the week is key. But I think the other thing to say is that there's probably no right or wrong way, and I would encourage coaches to be themselves and to kind of let their own personalities come through within reason. I think if you look at the top level, you've got the guy that's ahead of everyone at the moment in terms of Klopp is one of the most animated managers out there. So, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think you've obviously got to do it within the kind of the rules of the game and make sure it's not offensive or abusive in any way. But I do think, managers should have the leeway to be themselves and kind of manage the way that they want. I mean, in our league, for example, Ian Everett's different to Neil Ardley, who's different to Gary Johnson, who's different to Alan Dowson. They're all different in terms of their styles, and I guess they will all pick one which works for them. I guess it's how you can affect the players and what the players need at that time. And I think, especially for probably youth coaches and development coaches, it's important that it's all about the players and the players learning and how they're going to improve and the things that you maybe need to say to them to make that happen. At the top level, it's obviously all about winning. So it's how you can affect your individuals or your players to make the performance better and to make you have a better opportunity to win the game. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. I think there's a fair amount of psychology going back to that again that probably comes into play. I think one of the trends we've kind of gone away from, there was a time about 10 years ago where managers sat up in the stand and watched because they felt that gave them a better view. I've heard some managers say that the psychology of the players, they like looking across and seeing the manager in the dugout, and I can kind of understand that side of it as well. So there's probably not a right or wrong way. I'm very much, and Douse is at Woking as well, where we stand up for probably the 90 minutes. We're very much kind of on the sideline looking to encourage the players. We kick every ball, and that's just our way. There are times when we're slightly less animated, I guess. We've tried sitting down on a couple of occasions, and it just doesn't feel right. So I guess you've just got to kind of pick what works for you. And I guess ultimately, probably there's three things you can affect. You can affect the personnel once a game kicks off. So you've obviously got your three substitutions you can make. You can affect the formation that you play, so you might be able to make changes within that to improve it, and you can obviously affect the system that you play or the style you play, so you might go more direct and get that information onto your players. Other than that, there's not a lot you can do. You've got to hope that the players kind of are motivated and they perform and they make all the right decisions on the day, which obviously is not always the case.
No, I do take my hats off to managers, because it is always one of the things, like particularly when I've been involved with Margate, and you obviously get to know the personnel really well, and you want your team to do the best they can. But being sat next to the dugout sometimes watching the 90 minutes unfold, I find it hard to control my emotions, and so let alone how managers do it. But one of the things I'm sensing from your experience is that it's absolutely fundamental, and the sign of a good manager or a good coach is one who really knows their players and knows their strengths. So what would you say or suggest is the quickest and most effective way to get messages across to the players during game time?
Yeah, I think effective is the key word there, isn't it? I think, you've got to do it in an effective way. There's obviously lots of different ways to do it. And, I think a couple of things you've got to be wary of is when you try and get the information on. I would say probably, especially for kind of youth coaches, is try and be very, very careful of trying to get information on why the ball's in play and why there's kind of action going on, because that certainly distracts from what the players are doing. I think stoppages in play are always quite a good time to try and get some information on. And once again, you've got to be very, very clear and quick with the information you're looking to get on. Players not going to stand there for 30 seconds listening for you to kind of spell out all the tactical ways you want them to change. So it's very important to get it on quite quickly. I mean, sometimes it's just as easy as a little thumbs up or a point to say, maybe your position needs to adjust. Sometimes it's a bit more detailed than that. One of the things we've done at Woking last season a couple of times is write down on a notepad and actually get one of the players to take a note on to either a specific individual we wanted to get some information onto, or sometimes to the whole team in terms of we're changing shape. This is what we're doing. There's not enough time to tell everyone. So I think the opposition had an injury at the time, and we got the information onto our captain, and he kind of got everyone in a huddle and showed them what we were going to try and do for the last half hour of the game. So there's lots of ways to do it. It's I guess just picking the most kind of effective and quick thing for you. And you've got to know your players as well. There's certain players, and we've all had them, that just go over their head. So sometimes trying to get the information on during a game is pointless. You look at their eyes rolling around, and it's sometimes better to wait for half time. So yeah, I guess it's about knowing your players.
It's funny you say that, because again, I can just think of some brilliant examples where I've heard a manager give some really, concise coaching points, but it's just completely lost on that individual player. And I always feel a sense of sympathy towards fullbacks when they've got constantly bombing back and forth, and they're the ones that often are getting all the messages in the ear as well. So it's interesting to hear how you take a bit more of a strategic approach in terms of, again, knowing the players. And you mentioned the captain there. Do you have a sort of go-to player to get the key messages across? And is that often your captain, or sometimes is it potentially another player in the mix?
I think it probably depends what the information is. I think if it's something kind of for more of the whole team, I think the captain's normally the person that would do that. And we've got a very good captain at Woking, Josh Casey, who talks really well in amongst the group in terms of team huddles and everything else. So he's kind of the go-to for us. I guess we've also got other players that from kind of watching them and observing them on the training ground have probably got a bit more of a tactical understanding about the game and about maybe not just their own position but other people's positions as well. And these players are also quite good to give leadership roles to and kind of impart that information. There's certain players, and it's normally the same ones that ignore you when you shout on, that just concentrate on their own position, which again is fair enough. That's kind of their personality, and sometimes to give them information to pass on would get lost. So I think it's definitely about knowing your players, but you probably get to know quite quickly the ones that you can give that extra bit of responsibility to in terms of communication on the pitch. And ultimately it's their job once they're on the pitch. It's down to the players. So it's sometimes good to give them that bit of responsibility as well.
And what you say there, I think, will be really important for anyone watching who coaches within youth football as well, because that's something you see within the age groups, is that sort of teaching players to take that responsibility, to develop their leadership skills and to become good communicators, which are all really fundamental parts to being a good footballer, particularly for those that want to break into non-league football, because it is really, really competitive. And I think it's something that's often overlooked by people about just quite how hard it is to sustain a really good career in the non-league game. It's fiercely competitive and physical. Yeah. So I guess if you can adapt that side of your game and be someone that can have a tactical input in terms of like the communication, that makes them a real asset. And one point that I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, and it's again something that sort of fascinates me as to why anyone would want to be a non-league manager, because it just seems so stressful, the amount of hours that go in. And
me and you both.
I truly take my hat off to the guys in the non-league game. But it's about pressure. And obviously listening in on the Coach's Corner that you did with James last week, you've been involved in some really high profile games, from massive FA Cup runs to promotion to then, fighting and standing your ground in the National League, which again I think is probably one of the most competitive leagues in the pyramid. How do you deal with pressure, and is it something that you've learned throughout your career to deal with better, I suppose?
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those things. I mean, firstly, I'm the assistant manager, so the buck doesn't stop with me, which is quite a nice feeling at times. It's it's obviously that the managers have that extra pressure on top of their heads, because that's ultimately where everyone's going to point the fingers if it doesn't go so well. But yeah, I think it's something that probably experience, the more experience you get of different situations. I'd certainly say the way I am in the dugout a couple of years ago, there was a situation a couple of years ago where I got removed from the dugout, actually got sent off for questioning a decision at half time of a referee, and it was a big learning curve for me at the time. We lost the game. We actually ended up with 9 players, and I always look back at myself and thought, was I kind of the catalyst for that in terms of the aggression of the players in the second half, and probably overstepped the line. So I think things like that are good learning experiences for you. I think as long as you're kind of within the rules of the game, again, it's an emotional game, it's a passionate game, and certainly at the top level, and when there's 3 points on the line, there's a lot at stake, and you do feel that in the dugout at different points during the game. But I think what you've got to try and do is control your emotions as much as you can, and think with a clear head. It's okay being kind of passionate and shouting and standing up and kind of kicking every ball, but I think as long as your thought process is still clear, that's okay. When you're shouting and screaming, if you miss something going on that's going to, have a negative impact on the team, you might miss the other team maybe have changed shape or made a substitution while you're shouting. And then I think that's when you do have to be really, really careful. But I think if you can kind of keep clear in those moments and try to always think about the outcome, depending on the point of the game, you've got to kind of get the 3 points. So, I think if you keep the outcome in mind, it makes you probably think a little bit more clearly. There was a few years ago, reading Clive Woodward's book, and they did a lot of training on different scenarios in games. So when the ultimate pressure was on, they were kind of ready for it because they practiced it. So, we're 10 points up with 5 minutes to go. How are we going to play in that scenario? And I know a lot of football coaches do similar things. What if we go down to 10 men? What if we're 1-0 down with 5 minutes to go? How are we going to play? And I think that's probably coming into it a little bit more, which of course trains the players for it as well. Because in the emotion of things, it's sometimes easy to get lost. And I think, if the management team get lost, then it's easy for the players to do the same. So as difficult as it is, it's really, really difficult at times. And like you say, I sometimes think people probably can't understand the pressure until they've stood there and been in those scenarios. But it's I think experiences certainly help mold you in terms of the way you are and the way you act. And ultimately, if you can try and remember the outcome is the most important thing, then that's probably the key thing. And especially around referees, actually, we felt we were on the kind of wrong end of a few decisions, and we actually got a referee's assessor in and had a really good meeting with him just about kind of the way the referees operate and the way they're kind of assessed. And I didn't know, for example, that the referees watched the videos of the game a couple of days later and actually assessed and given a score by the assessor, which was news to me. And I think probably that's given us a little bit more clarity in terms of, especially when you're talking about getting onto referees about decisions. And probably once you've taken that side of it away, it does make you concentrate on your team a little bit more. So that's another aspect of it that managers often fall into the trap of getting caught up with the referee and shouting at the linesman and the fourth official. And, I think during those times you're obviously... So certainly that meeting helped us. And, I'm not always going to be kind to referees going forward, but it certainly helped.
Well, no, it's fascinating that you took that step to kind of address something that you thought would help your team. And I think it's also really interesting, the dynamic between pressure and preparation. And that, I think, applies to anyone involved in any aspect of football, even from my own sort of background in preparing for match days from a sort of marketing, fan engagement. My premise was always, all I can do is manage the manageables and prepare in the best way, and then hopefully the day will be successful. And I could never control whether the team would lose, win or draw, but preparation would help, and then that would ease the idea of pressure. But I think that's really fascinating.
There is a big element of that, isn't there? They talk about control the controllables, and I guess if you can do everything you can in the week and train the way you want to train and get the players as organised and informed as you can come the weekend, to a certain extent, you've got to kind of stand back and let them go and play and perform. And I think that the big thing you've got to do in game is just adapt. If it's not going the way you thought it was going to go, or maybe the opposition's playing a slightly different shape or personnel, then you've got to be able to adapt quite quickly and either get information on or tactically make a change. But in terms of going into the game, I think you control what you can, and I think it's wasted energy if you worry about every different scenario that can happen until it actually does. So it's important to be able to adapt on the spot as well.
Again, I would suggest that some of the best managers and coaches that I've seen do have that element of fluidity. So again, for any sort of younger aspiring coaches that have got like a real philosophy in terms of how they want to play football and set up their teams and stuff, that's really good. But sort of your approach and your style has to be adaptable, I suppose, to be successful. And I think what, again, is really interesting with managers and coaches in particular is sometimes like supporters go away, particularly like in defeat or moments like which you were describing. There was a moment in a game and you look back on that and you reflected on that and that was a disappointment for you. But knowing that you've done everything that you can still kind of take a sense of satisfaction and then just look to get consistently better, which again, like you said at the very start, with the way the FA is going now, as a coach, you've got to constantly want to better yourself and improve, and often that's probably going to come in the moments of not necessarily failure or losing, but the moments where you can look back on it and think, I could have done a little bit better there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no kind of learning and education's great, and I'm all for that, and I recommend coaches to go on every course they can and read every book they can, but the experiences as well, I think, go hand in hand with that. You're actually there doing it, and it's obviously there's a big difference between development football, where for me the players are learning and you need to develop the players, and the result isn't the most important thing, and then obviously first team senior football, where the result is everything. And I think you can't probably confuse the two. It's very, very important that the message on match days for development coaches is very much around that. It's an extension of their learning and how are they going to get better during that game. And I think when you're feeding back to them, you should very much have that in mind. At our level, it's win at all costs. It's what can you do during that 90 minutes to make sure your team wins. And sometimes you do go away from your own kind of philosophies, and I don't think coaches should be scared of doing that. I'd urge every coach to kind of go and study different styles, and if you're a 4-3-3 manager, go and have a look at teams playing 3-5-2, see how they do it. Maybe some things you could pick up to give you a different element to your own style going forward. And it's not to say you've got to go and use every different system and style of play, because your philosophy is your own. But I do think it's important to go out and study different kind of ideas and what other people are doing. I certainly think those experiences have helped me going to watch different coaches at professional club training grounds and seeing how everyone else is doing it, is a massive thing.
Yeah, that is really, really key, I think. And one of the points that came up when preparing for this, particularly sort of from youth coaches and those beginning to, like you say, develop players, and then those that potentially are involved in the really competitive steps of the tier. It's that distinction about knowing when is the best time to shout and when the best time, well, when not to, basically, because you can be calm and cool and assured, but ultimately there will be moments when you do need to turn that switch on. And it sounds like that's something in your own coaching career you've learned to do. Have you got any tips for anyone listening in terms of how to manage aggression in a good way? Because obviously, it's a competitive sport. Aggression and seeking to be the best are key attributes, and they can be really valuable when you're going out and wanting to get a win.
Yeah, I think there's probably two things you need to think about. I think first and foremost is, why are you shouting? Like, what are you hoping to get out of it? Are you hoping to get an improved performance out of an individual or the team? And then it's probably, what are you shouting? Like, what's the information you're shouting on? I'd especially within youth football, obviously you've got to steer clear of shouting criticism and being abusive, because that's certainly not the way players learn. Now, there's this argument at the top level that some players respond better to that. I've not seen loads of players that respond better to that way of kind of doing things. I think players can certainly get a little bit G'd up by that, and maybe you get a little 5-minute burst of energy out of them where they're just kind of, they're almost shot back into life. But I think, again, you've got to be really kind of precise with what you're actually trying to get across, what point you're trying to make. But again, I think, managers and coaches get caught up in it. Sometimes managers and coaches kind of shout and shout throughout the game because that's their way, and that's the way that they kind of get through the game themselves. And a lot of the information is white noise to the players. I'm a big fan of encouraging from the sideline. I think it's interesting because you'd probably, if you did a study, you'd find out that managers and coaches probably shout less when the team's doing well and winning, which is strange, isn't it? But when obviously they're not doing so well, they think they need to get loads more information on rather than making specific changes. So I think it's about knowing your players, knowing what the players respond to. I mean, I didn't play for long, but I kind of played lower tier non-league football, and I was better to someone encouraging me, someone kind of telling me well done and being constructive with it. What about trying this? Or it's difficult at the top level because there's so much, and we talked about pressure, there's so much at stake that sometimes the message is quite frantic and has to get on the pitch, and you're looking for that kind of impact, your body language, the tone of your voice, you're looking for that quick impact. And I think what I would say, sometimes it's good to reflect and go away from that and just think about a little bit more, what impact you're trying to have and whether that's the right approach to use. But again, every manager, every coach is different. I think especially people in development football have probably got to think in a bit more depth about what they're doing. Some players are geared up towards a certain management style, and when they go into a different team, they can't cope with it. So it's very much about knowing your players and knowing kind of what's gonna work for them, I guess, at the right time, and how to motivate them. Going back to the start, in that pre-match talk, it's all about motivating and trying to get an extra little 1% out of them where you can.
That extra 1% again is something that is applied in terms of management as a whole. And I think you've highlighted some points there, not only just apply to football, but management, whether it's in the workplace and whatever industry it is. Those are some really good tips to take away there. And as we begin to wrap up, I just want to ask whether there's any particular game that stands out to you. And I'm going to ask the negative question first and then the positive. But is there any kind of match day for you that you remember just from start to finish on that Saturday? It didn't go right for you in terms of how you like to prepare as a coach and what you might have learned from that experience?
I mean, certain games you probably remember more so for the result of the game, I guess, more than the preparation. I think we're very much pride ourselves on being professional and looking to kind of prepare in the best way we can on a weekly basis. There's been occasions, I remember we played, I think we were playing, it might have been Royston a few years ago when we were at Hampton, and we played Royston in the replay of the FA Cup, I believe it was, on Tuesday night, and we got stuck in horrendous traffic. And we were talking, I mean, we were probably, it was a 7:45 kickoff, so we'd normally like to arrive at kind of 6:30. I think we got there about 20 past 7. So we ran in. We obviously tried to get the kit men were frantically trying to get the kit out. We were kind of running out, trying to get the cones and footballs out. The most difficult thing was players were all coming in cars, in their own cars. So they were at different stages in terms of their journeys. So the manager was on the phone trying to find out who was closest and almost picking a team based off the 11 that were going to get there first. Yeah. And as you were kind of doing your warm-up, I remember starting the warm-up with 4 or 5 players, and then you'd see like another player drive into the car park and quickly run out.
Sprinting out, yeah.
Just be players dropping in. I mean, it was like a grassroots football session on a Saturday morning where players were just coming from everywhere. And yeah, in terms of preparation, that's probably one of the worst, because as a coach, you want everything to be spot on. And then when it happens like that, you've just got to kind of make the best of it. And, you know, you talk about being adaptable. We tried our best to be that, but we lost the game. So there's probably a lesson there.
But you know what? I nod my head so much because obviously I've worked at Margate for a number of seasons, and given their geographical location, the number of times that there'd be an accident on the motorway. And I think we played Bath in a replay, and it was a similar thing. But actually, Bath were able to get there earlier. It was our players. And actually, it turned out to be one of the best games that I can remember in my time there, because it was almost like everything was thrown out the window, all the preparation. And it was just hell for leather, 2 teams that put on really good displays. I think it went to penalties in the end. But yeah, I've seen quite a lot of that in my experience. And again, it's quite unique. And I'm sure people that are involved in non-league football will have their own sort of similar experiences to that one.
Another one real quick, just we played Salford City. This is back when Salford had kind of just been taken over, and it was obviously Bernard and Jono were the 2 managers, and they came down to play us in pre-season for Hampton, obviously arranged through Gary Neville and Martin Tyler. And that they were literally running so late. I think they arrived on their coach at 2:45.
Oh, wow.
Douse went up to them and kind of said, do you want a delayed kickoff? And they'd already got changed on the coach. The players are ready. They said, no, don't worry about that. We just go straight onto the pitch and play. And brilliant. You know, I'm sure there's plenty of stories like that, but it's getting slightly more professional. But, you know, with the way the roads are and the trains are and everything else, there's, even at the highest level, I'm sure there's things like that happen every weekend.
Oh, definitely so. And certainly like in the non-league pyramid as well. I think there was something with the National League this season, wasn't there, when teams weren't able to get up and down the country when there was something wrong with the Virgin network. So again, all the things that managers and coaches like yourselves have to always be sort of prepared for. On the flip side of my question, is there an example of a game on a positive front where from start to finish it all went well and you felt like you made a really kind of positive contribution, which I'm sure is all the time?
Yeah, there's only been once this season. I think probably a couple of games. I think first day of the season, Dagenham away, obviously our first game kind of as a club back in the league, but our first game kind of managing and coaching at that level. And we talked a lot in pre-season about what formation we were going to go with, and the manager was set on playing with a 3-5-2, and we worked on that for the last few weeks, and to work off kind of set pieces and being successful off of set pieces. And we won the game 2-0 off of 2 set pieces. First day of the season, first win in the league, so that was a real good one. And then the other one was we played Yeovil at home, and Yeovil, obviously a strong team in the division, going really well at the time. And they were, I think, the only team at the time that were playing a 4-4-2 with a diamond. And they played it really, really well. And so we had this idea early in the week to kind of match them up and play the same. And we'd never done it before. So, you know, we had to talk to the players about it on the Tuesday and then do some work on it on the Thursday. And we won the game 1-0 on the Saturday. And it kind of, you know, one of those perfect games where it plays out exactly the way you'd kind of imagined it, drawing it up in the week. And it doesn't happen often. So when it kind of happens like that, it's very, very rewarding indeed.
Definitely. And I think the kind of tips and nuggets of information you've shared over the last half an hour will have given a lot of people lots to think about. And certainly for me, it's really eye-opening because, again, I don't think enough credit is given to the level of detail that goes in preparing players and building setups to compete in the National League, whether it be, the division that you guys are in, or South, North, even, with the Isthmian League with Margate, the level of preparation that goes in, and actually an argument to be had that it's far, far tougher for coaches at this level when your contact time is so limited compared to some of the resources that you see with Premier League clubs, like with these documentaries that I'm spending all my time watching in lockdown. You just can't believe the scale of the resource that goes in there. So hopefully this show will have brought a lot of really interesting insight for people, and it certainly has for me. And so thank you so much for giving up your time for Coach's Corner this evening.
Plenty of time at the minute, so it's never a problem.
Plenty of time to watch back all those videos of the season that was 2019-20. But no, thank you. I really, really enjoyed that. And for everyone tuned in this evening, thank you so much. To make sure that you subscribe to Back of the Net and give this show a like. You'll always get the latest alerts for when our content does go up and live, and we will be with you again very soon. We'll stay tuned for this week because I think we're back again on Friday. So take care, take it easy, and we will see you again very soon.